Okay, guys, good morning. Welcome back. And just about 3 minutes till we get our class meeting started. Hope you had a good weekend. Monday, March 15th. Yeah, just take a few and we'll be ready to go. PG. Hi, Kylie. Good morning. Just a couple more minutes. Hi, Sydney. Hope you had a good weekend. Cordy, hi there. Claire, good morning. Hey, Sebastian. Hey, Chase. Okay, guys, so let's get started, I guess. We're pretty much there at 10 a.m. Welcome back, everybody. So let me just, and hey, Zachary, Zoe, Annabella, good to see everybody here, as usual. So let me start off with a quick question. Well, I already mailed out the study guide last Thursday, so we've talked about that on Friday. But last night, I also sent off in the evening some links to some YouTube videos that discuss the trolley problem. One of those videos is a lecture given at Yale by Tamar Gendler. Gendler, she's one of the editors of our textbook. So it's nice to see her lecture over there on the trolley problem. And she also gives some discussion of ethical theory like Kant and Mill. So that's a little bit of also useful review on those topics for you. So I sent you those links, and I also notified you that I'm done with grading the first essay, and I'm now finished with that. So I said to the students in the message that if you want your grade on that, simply just send me an email, and that's how I like to return and report grades to students individually. So there's a little bit of a personalized back and forth. So I would just ask that you send me an email whenever if you want your grade on that first essay, and I'll send you back your grade and whatever comments within a 48 hours max. Sometimes it takes me a little bit of time. Last night I couldn't do any responses because I kind of had to get to sleep, and this morning I was prepping for class before, but now they're done. So whenever you want your grade, please let me know, and for sure I'll be hitting you back with a reply within a couple of days at the most. So yeah, that leaves us with 2 meetings this week leading up to the midterm exam on Friday. So today and Wednesday, we have these 2 class periods that we're just going to devote to reviewing the information on the study guide that I sent out last Thursday. So right now, I guess, I would ask you guys to pull up your own copy of the study guide, whether you have a printed copy or whether you have another window that you can open where the study guide is shown. And you're basically going to direct me through whichever questions and topics on this study guide that you'd like to go over as we get ready for our exam on Friday. So the way that I kind of like review sessions to go is for the students to take most of the initiative to at least help provide the information for the answers. Because after all, you're the ones that have to take this exam, so you need practice being able to formulate the answers. So I like it when the students is kind of student-driven, but I'll certainly be involved. So every time I think I need to add some extra clarity or detail, if I need to correct any misunderstandings or add further information to whatever students are saying in the chat, then I'll do that. So you can just rely on the information given in this review session as good, solid, authoritative answers for different questions. Also, feel free to use your textbook. All the questions on the study guide are derived from the lectures and the readings in the book. So everything that is asked on the study guide is something that you can find in the book. Nothing on the study guide is something that's not in the book. So I just want you to be comfortable using your book as a solid resource, because that's the main resource in the class. When you do your review, go back to the original source text and find information if needed. Also, you can check your notes and the previously recorded video lectures that are always going to stay on the archive. So with that, just kind of as a primary, I now throw it over to you. Whenever you have a question, something from the study guide, just call it out, and we'll go in whatever order you want. There are 43 questions that are listed on the study guide. On the day of the exam, Friday, I'm going to select a sampling of these questions, maybe 9 or 10. And from there, you'll have to answer like 6 or 7 of those questions on the day of the exam. Nobody knows which ones I will select, nor do I. So for that reason, you want to be at least able to answer as many of the random different questions as you could. And the questions will not be changed. The wording will not be changed. So you're already looking at the study guide, which contains the midterm questions in it. We're just not sure which ones they will be. So, okay, I hope that's all well and clear. From here, go ahead and just ask whatever things you'd like from the study guide. And once I get something from you in the chat, I'll meet you halfway and I'll start helping you guys explain to me and to each other the answers. So if I was you and I was looking at the study guide, I would probably try to select certain questions that were less clear to me or that I thought I might need a little additional assistance with. But only you know that, which ones you want that extra help with. So go ahead and let me know and we'll go in whatever order. Pull up your study guide for sure. There's no lecture today. There's no new material. I'm not teaching you things, but I will help you review. So that's why I gotta wait for you. Okay, Kylie, question 21. Let me start with you and then Lane will get to yours next, okay? So Kylie, it says, question 21, explain the test that Everett suggests for gaining evidence that a certain type of being does not exist. Okay, good. So that question has to do with the work of Nicholas Everett, the author named in the question. His article is called Theism in Modern Science. So who could tell me something about that? What does Mr. Everett say that you could do to gain evidence that a being doesn't exist? Okay, and so thinking about the answer to this, it has to do with the argument that he writes on page 66 on the left column of the page. So maybe take a look at that page or just go back to your notes or in your own memory and try and tell me if you can what he said about gaining evidence that a certain being does not exist. If you remember the example that he utilized to start his discussion, it was the example of someone who arrives on a deserted island and they're trying to determine if there's another survivor there. So I'm hinting at the right information, but let's see who can tell me something that brings these pieces together. What could a person do to discover information or evidence that a being doesn't exist? Think of the deserted shipwrecked sailor example and then see if you can formulate some kind of response for me here. So go ahead. And you have to answer it. You have to give me the answer, and then once you give me something, anything, then I can help clarify, expand on it, or add further detail. So we're going with question 21. Who could tell me? How might or could someone gain evidence that a certain being doesn't exist? And you can pay attention to the argument listed on page 66 and explain what its point is. So this is where you have to start typing. You. We're waiting for you to give us the answer, so please. Okay, looking for changes, C. Good, Cordy. Let's lay the full argument out there. if there's a being with nature N and intentions I, then it would produce change C in the world. But the world does not display change C. So therefore, there's evidence that the being does not exist. So the argument has a structure. The first premise says that if you thought there was a certain type of being with some given description, then you'd be in position to predict what behavior it would do. That would be the changes C that you would expect, the apt behavior. So if we were looking for another survivor on an island, what would the appropriate behavior be in that case? Footprints, tools, maybe an enclosure, some shelter. So anyway, if you think a type of being exists, then you could speculate as to what behavior it would do. You could reasonably speculate as to what behavior it would do. The second premise says, suppose you don't see any evidence of those types of behaviors or changes. So like that would be looking through the island for the signs of life of another survivor, but not seeing any such signs, not seeing footprints, not seeing tracks or anything else. Now you've got evidence that that being doesn't exist. So the basic format is assess what type of behavior the being would do if it existed. Then if you find no signs of it in the world, of that behavior, then you've got evidence the being's not real. The example he starts with is, suppose there's another survivor on a stranded, deserted island, then they would likely do fill in the blank, find, make tools, create footprints, noises, etc. Those would be the changes. Suppose you look for those changes, don't see any. Now you have evidence the being doesn't exist. Now, in terms of utilizing this about God, he says if God is the being that creates this universe just for the sake of man, and we are like the crown jewel of the creation created in his image, then you'd expect the universe to be a certain type of way. You'd expect it to be that we appeared early, humans appeared early, not long after the other animals, that the earth is in the center of the universe, and you'd also expect the universe not to be way, way, way bigger than the earth part. But according to science anyway, none of those traditional assumptions are true. Not only did we not appear early in the universe at all, we're not in the middle, and it's so much bigger than us, the universe, compared to the earth. So those are the things that he says are like not seeing the signs of behavior you would have expected, and therefore leads to the conclusion that there's evidence that God doesn't exist. So it's basically like you'd look for the signs of behavior you'd expect that the being was real, and if you don't see them, now you have evidence that it doesn't exist. I think I offered you maybe a different version of that example. If not, let me mention it here again. When I was a little kid and they were saying there was Santa Claus, I thought, well, maybe there is, maybe there isn't. But if there's a Santa, then when I stay up all night and look at the chimney, I should see certain signs. Like I should see ho, 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 or footprint, or like I should hear him coming down the chimney, sleigh bells ringing. And if I don't see those signs, I'll have evidence that he's not real. So I stayed up, watched the chimney, didn't see anything, and that gave me evidence that there was no such thing, because once again, the behavior I was looking for to give me evidence was not seen. And so in the case of God, the argument is the universe would be built on a human scale and with man in mind. That's what you'd expect if God's really the creator for the sake of us. But science doesn't seem to show that, so there's the equivalent of not seeing the expected changes. Okay, so then let's go on. Lane, you mentioned in question 31, describe an action that's morally obligatory according to one ethical theory and morally impermissible according to another. Okay, good. So do that. Please provide an example of one action that the two different moral theories would disagree about. One of them says, you must do this, and the other one says, you must not do this. Can you give an example, hypothetical example or whatever, of an action that would be judged obligatory on one case and impermissible on another? So the moral theories that we studied are pretty much Kantianism and utilitarianism. So effectively, you would have to consider and come up with your own example of some action that one of those theories would say you must do and the other would say it's wrong to do that. So let's hear from you. What do you think could be such an example? One action, two ethical theories, and they disagree about the morality of that action. So let me know. You have to come up with the example. It says describe an action. So knowing about these two theories, just tell me something that they don't say, that they don't agree about whether it's right or wrong. Like utilitarian would say you should do this. Kantian would say you can't do that. Or vice versa. Kantian says you have to do this, and the utilitarian is saying that you shouldn't. What can you think of as an example? So, I mean, if it's going to be like obligatory according to one of the theories, then you have to consider what the theory says is morally obligatory. Like in utilitarianism, the obligation is whatever creates the most utility or pleasure. In Kantianism, the obligation is whatever conforms to the moral law according to the categorical imperative. I'm just giving you like hints and suggestions. You're supposed to come up with the answer though, so please tell me the answer. Some example of an action that would be judged differently according to the two moral theories. Because we've talked about actions just like that as we discussed objections and stuff. For sure, objections to utilitarianism. So let me know. You don't want to take too much time to just wait for everyone to give something. So you have to say something to continue the discussion. But this is how it is. I'm not going to just report back the answers. Students have to meet me halfway with some type of possible information that I can then expand on or add to. Okay, white lie. There we go, Courtney. So let's work with that example. A white lie could be considered a good thing to do according to which ethical theory? Yeah, okay. I'll get to you too, Sydney, but let me start with Cordy's example because I think it's a good, reasonable example. What is a white lie, and which ethical theory might say that it sometimes is an obligation to tell a white lie? You're telling me utilitarian and Kantianism, two different ethical theories, so take your pick. Which one says that it could be good to tell such a lie? So Lane, you give another example. Could it be someone like a vigilante who goes against the law but is working for the happiness of others? That's another possible case, sure. And Angel, I see you're now answering the other question. Utilitarianism promotes more happiness. Very good. Okay, so let me summarize these points. You could imagine a situation where telling a lie would create more happiness than telling the truth. Like say, for example, someone asks you whether you liked a meal that they prepared and you didn't like it and it made you almost feel nauseous. But if you say that to the person, their feelings will be hurt. And so you'll rather lie, which will make them happy. Now, to utilitarianism, what you're supposed to do is always whatever creates the most happiness. So if lying creates the most happiness, go ahead and lie. In this case, it seems like the lie is the right thing then to the utilitarian. But to a Kantian, it's never acceptable to lie because you'd have to be able to make a maxim which says, I will withhold the truth or I will say something false when I believe that it is to my advantage or to someone's benefit. And you cannot universalize that maxim, otherwise lying would become the norm instead of the exception. And then we would not be able to rely on people's truth when they ever assert anything. So a white lie could be an obligation to a utilitarian, but it's always wrong to a Kantian. And let me give another example. Sydney, you say sacrifice your life to save 3 other people. I don't know, Sydney, why don't you just talk about murder? I mean, your life is your life to deal with, but murdering a person to save 3 other people would definitely be not okay to a Kantian. Okay, so like take it, I go to a homeless encampment and I kill a homeless person, take their organs, and I give them to 3, productive members of society that everyone loves and stuff that are dying of various types of organ failure using the one homeless person's organs. Now that's clearly wrong if you're a Kantian, because why? Because Kant says you're never supposed to ever treat a human being how? As a means to an end. So just helping you with that. You're never supposed to treat a human as a means to an end. So that's wrong according to Kant. But you can imagine in theory some utilitarian arguing that if that saves more lives than it costs, then it's better to do it than not do it. Take the transplant scenario, another obvious case. In transplant, 1 is killed to save 5, and it's clearly wrong from a Kantian standpoint. But to a utilitarian, you might argue that it's at least within the realm of moral permissibility because it could save more lives than the alternative option. Now, here's another case. I could throw this one out at you too. Something that Kant says you have to do, but the utilitarian says you must not. Well, I guess we talked about telling the truth. So there is sort of that example. But if telling the truth produces not any utility or even the contrary, pain, then the utilitarian would say you shouldn't tell the truth and the Kantian would say that you must. So we have our options here. Any action that uses someone as a means but creates more utility than not would be obligatory to utilitarianism and forbidden to Kant. And any action that conforms to the moral law but does not generate as much utility as the alternative would be obligatory to Kant but impermissible to the utilitarian. So there's these different types of options. There's no one set example you have to give, but it has to be an example which satisfies that criteria, that given your explanation of it, the utilitarian theory says it's either obligatory or impermissible, and the Kantian theory would say the opposite about the same example. Sometimes when I've asked this type of question on exams in the past, the student gets confused and they give me two different cases. Like here, the utilitarian would say, lie in this case. And here's another case. A Kantian says, like, don't kill a homeless person. But those are two different cases. So make sure that if this question were used, you refer to one example, that the two theories diverge with regard to their moral assessment of it. Okay, so there we have number 31. Let's go forward to the next. What's your next question? That's one that only you can ask, so let me know what is the next one that you prefer to talk about. Okay, so Brandon, 37, Singer's response to two of the objections to his argument. I'm looking at my study guide. Okay, yeah, so first of all, Peter Singer, what is Singer's argument about? Peter Singer argued that if you could just tell me the conclusion, you don't have to go through his full argument, but what's the basic bottom line of Peter Singer's argument? What's he arguing for? What is his position? Mr. Peter Singer, who wrote the article Rich and Poor from 1993. The basic final conclusion that he reaches is that people that we have a moral obligation to assist the global poor. Yes, that's right. So that's his conclusion. And, there's a whole argument that he gives. So basically it says if you can prevent bad things without making comparable sacrifices, then you should. And absolute poverty is bad. And we can prevent some without making comparable sacrifices. So therefore we should. Now, in reply to that argument, there are a number of objections. And so question 37 is asking you about his response to the objections. But if you give an answer about how he responds to them, you also have to briefly at least summarize what those two objections would be. So by name at least, can anybody tell me the name of some of these objections to Singer's argument? We reviewed 4 of them. And so that's what I would ask you next. Just the names at least. Quick reference to some of the objections against Singer's conclusion that we have an obligation to assist the global poor. Objections against that include what things? Taking care of your own, yes. And there's also, that's one of the 4 that we talked about. So we have taking care of our own, one objection. Or what's another? Property rights, good, another possible objection. And furthermore, we've also got 2 more that we talked about. So taking care of our own, property rights, yes. Triage, correct. And then last, but I don't know, not least, or maybe it is least, but there's just one more. So you've got leave it to the government. Okay, good. 4 objections. Now, how does he report back rebuttals against the objections? So let's go through them one by one, I guess. Even though the question only asks you to refer to 2, we should review all of them so that you have all the options available. So the first objection, taking care of our own. What does that one say? It says that, no, I don't have an obligation to assist the global poor because that's too widespread of an obligation that extends too far throughout the whole world. If I have an obligation to care for anybody or take care of them, it's not that many people, it's merely my own people. And so someone could think that my own includes those like my friends, my family, maybe my fellow countrymen and women, my fellow citizens, but not the international poor. So that's one objection. Taking care of our own, not the whole world, just friends, family, and fellow citizens. Another objection, property rights. This one is saying that your wealth and your income is your property. And saying that you're obligated to give to the poor of your wealth and income is like saying that you don't have the right to hold on to your money if you want it. But clearly you have that right. Since the wealth you have is your property, you're free and you're at liberty to dispose of it and to oversee it in whichever way you deem most suitable to your interests. So if you want to waste your money, if you want to spend it on things that are even self-destructive, if you want to save it and just hoard it, I don't know. It's up to you, I guess, because it's your property, and no one or no thing can tell you otherwise that you have an obligation to give some of it up for a purpose that you maybe just don't want to. So that's your property rights. Another objection. Don't tell me I have an obligation to give to the poor because my money that I could give is my property, and I'm at liberty to do whatever I want with it, spend it on myself, or not at all. Another objection is, let me take triage last. So another is leaving it to the government. Leaving it to the government says, shouldn't it be the government's responsibility, though, to help the poor in the third world, not the individual citizens? because the government has access to tax revenues through, the Treasury, and there's a more reliable source of funding. Everyone would be invested in it. So isn't that preferable and better than saying it's up to the individual obligation? And one more objection is triage. So triage is a medical policy that is deployed when you have an overflow of sick or injured persons and a deficit of available medical personnel and resources. So what do you do when you have too many people that need help, medical attention, and not enough attention to give? In that case, you have to make tough decisions about how to ration off care to have the biggest life-saving impact on the affected population. So you divide the group of injured or sick people into 3 categories: those that are the most injured, so that they're likely to die, unfortunately, even if they received help. The group that is the least injured or sick, that's the group of people who are likely to survive, even if they don't receive immediate care. And then you have this critical middle group, which is the group on the bubble, where they're likely to survive if receiving help and likely to die if they don't. So if you had a short amount of medical resources to attend to this big group, it would be unwise and a foolish waste of those scarce resources to send them all to the people with very light injuries, because they're not necessarily urgent cases. They're not going to die if they don't get the help. It would also be unwise and waste of available resources to send it to the worst injured group, because as badly injured as they are, they're not likely to be savable. So it's a lost cause. So you'd focus primarily the attention of the medical professionals and resources on that critical middle group. So this could be seen as an objection to Singer, because Singer advises us to provide aid and resources to the poorest of the poor in the third world. And in one way of looking at it, that violates the logic of triage, because it's like saying send help to the people that are the lost cause category and not likely to be helped by means of the assistance. So maybe we're really just making the group of poor people larger through the temporary Band-Aid that we provide through international aid. Doesn't address the root causes of poverty, makes the group bigger in the future, and just delays the problem and makes it bigger for another future generation. So don't help the people in the worst case category, either in triage or perhaps in international aid. Now, those are the objections. In fact, and I think another question talks just about the objections, so I'm kind of helping you with that as well, which is, so I guess the only time that they get mentioned is in this question. So anyway, those are the different objections. The question asks you to reply to 2 of them, how Singer would reply to 2 of them. So what did Singer say in response to taking care of our own? Does anybody know about that? Who could let me understand? What does Singer say back to those that say, you should only have an obligation to take care of your own, right? I mean, why should we have to take care of the third world and all the poor people out there that are hungry? What's his response to such an objection, if you can remember? A couple things that he says, but I'd like to hear it maybe from you. So you're Peter Singer now. You're Peter Singer, and somebody said to you, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take care of my own. So you, Peter, what are you saying now to that person? I just got to take care of my own, right? Why are you saying I have to help the international poor? That's not my own. Okay, Singer, what's your response? Okay, your own might be all right, but that doesn't mean all are all right. That's one thing. Yes, correct, Kylie. He says, well, the needs of people that are your own, if you're pretty much well-off first world citizen like we are, relatively speaking, then those needs are minor needs. I mean, it's not like life and death struggles. So the people that are in your world, in the first world, your friends, family, and fellow citizens are generally not doing too bad. So that would be prioritizing trivial and non-essential needs over life and death needs. So that's one point, yes. He also says this. Anyone else have something more? There's a little more there too. So one thing is the needs are not on a par. The needs of your own in the first world are minor and insignificant when we compare them to the dire extremity of need that you see in global poverty. But that's only one point of reply. What else does he say? Something else is also mentioned there. According, we may not think about them much because they're far away, but they're real and have real needs. That's another point, yes. He says, and he does talk about the racial discrimination thing too. So he says, well, why should it be that we just artificially concern ourselves with people that are within the territorial boundaries of our own country? I mean, whether a person's on this side or that side of a border, close to you, far away, scattered throughout the world, human needs are what they are, regardless of whether the person's close or far. So he says, geographic distance from you should not set the boundaries of your moral concern. It should just respond to human needs. And yes, Cordy, the last thing he does say is, Some people say I only care about my own, and when they say that, they mean people who look like me racially or have my same kind of ancestry. But why should that be relevant any more than national origin or nationality? So, he says that people don't usually think of it as a good thing that is socially rewarded when you say, I only care about my own race. That's bigoted, that's racist, that's discriminatory, right? That's a pernicious way of thinking and acting. So why would we say that's wrong in the case of race, but it's acceptable when we talk about nationality or whatever? He sees them both as lacking any kind of principled basis. So therefore, he says that's the rejection of that particular objection. Now, to the next one. So with last summary, the needs are not on a par. How far away people are from you is not a morally relevant distinction. And national identity is no more relevant as a marker of concern than racial identity, which is also, he thinks, clearly seen as bad. If you only mark off moral concern in terms of how people look. Okay, so then next up is so taking care of our own, leaving it to the government, property right. Okay, property rights. He says about the property rights, well, who could tell me about that? Does anyone know his reply to the whole property rights idea? So you're Peter Singer, and I tell you, I have no obligation to assist the poor. Come on, that's my property, that's my money. So I have the right to do what I want with it. If I don't want to give it to the poor, spend it on myself, not spend it at all, whatever, that's my property, so don't tell me I have an obligation. There's an objection. What's the reply given by Peter Singer to that? Okay, Cordy, he acknowledges property rights, but that's not the same as his argument. Yeah, so he says you do have the right to withhold aid because it is your property, so fair point. But the argument is not merely whether you have the right to withhold aid legally or whatever. It's about a moral question. Is it a good thing morally? Is it moral or immoral to withhold on this aid? And he says that it's not moral. It's not moral because these are people who have needs. And you can't just determine what's right or wrong by talking about what you have the right to do. That's an important point of this reply here. For example, like I think I mentioned this before, you have the right to drop out of school today, but that's not a good thing for you to do, right? All things considered, just because you have the right to do it doesn't make the case that it's good and that you should do it. So just having the right to do something doesn't take you all the way to, okay, and so you should, and it's a good thing. You have the right to drop out of school. You have the right to, I don't know, cut off all your friends. You have the right to do lots of things that probably wouldn't be good for you or for anybody. You have the right to, I don't know, liquidate all your funds and spend them on something non-essential, like, that you're never going to use. But that's not a good idea. So anyway, that's another point. Just having the right to do something doesn't settle a moral question as to whether you should or shouldn't do it. And then he also talks about Christianity and religious belief. He says, to those that profess belief in Christianity, which would be the majority of his audience writing to the West, how can you reconcile Christian principles of religion with a calloused and indifferent attitude towards the poor? Because in Christian scripture, and especially the New Testament, none other than Jesus keeps saying that you're definitely supposed to have a supreme concern with the least fortunate, be your brother's keeper, meek shall inherit the earth, and on and on. So he says not only is it kind of a weak argument because it just says you have the right to not give money, whether or not it's good, it also goes against what he takes to be basic principles of Christianity that he thinks most people espouse. So he sees that as a further contradiction in the way people argue about that. Okay, so after that, there's leave it to the government. I'll just make short work of his reply there. He just says, why not both, pretty much? So sure, the government might be a good source of aid for the third world poor, but that's no reason and no obstacle to individuals doing the same privately. More aid would be better. They're mutually supportive. They're not mutually exclusive. So even if the government should do more, that doesn't mean that people shouldn't either on their own initiative. And then about triage, he basically says this: with triage, people sound like they're worried about feeding into the problem by simply supporting the population growth of the third world and not taking care of the root causes of poverty. So that just adds up to people getting more numerous and still being poor and in need, which doesn't help the problem in the long run. But Peter Singer says that if you're really worried about the population growth in the third world, a better alternative to withdrawing aid and seeing the death rate increase and seeing decline in numbers through death, a better alternative to that would be to see a decline in numbers through lowered birth rate. And lowered birth rate is achievable by making progress towards a first world living standard and international aid in the form of contraceptive assistance and education and emancipation of women. So anyway, he thinks that there's a certain evil involved in abandoning aid to the third world and hoping that the numbers become smaller through that withdrawal of aid. And that would be the provision of aid which could achieve the status quo of reduced birth rate. Okay, so that's his replies to those 4 objections. If you wanted to talk about them, if that question came up, that's what you'd go into. So let's go forward from there. I saw no other questions yet, so let's just take whichever next one you want to go over. Plenty of time left, but we still want to keep moving, make the best use of our time together. So you'll let me know what you think is the next topic that's good to cover. What do you think is next? Okay, so Sydney asked about number 7. Rowe's example, magic can, magic hoe. Okay, so William Rowe is in that article giving an objection to Anselm's ontological argument. All right, so Anselm, you guys know, argued that God has to exist because his definition is greatest conceivable being, and being the greatest conceivable being means you have to exist in the mind and in reality, because existing in both is greater than just being a made-up idea in the mind. But Rowe doesn't like this argument. He disagrees with it. And he says the main problem is you can't prove something exists just by defining it as existing. You know, like literally putting the word existing in the definition of something does not really prove that it has to exist. And to show this, he gives us this example of these 2 invented words. So let's go over that. Who can tell me, please, what are those 2 words mean according to the stipulated definitions assigned to them by the author William Rowe? So magic can definition means what? Magic hoe, what is the definition of either of those 2 words? That'll be a first point to cover. So that's all I'm asking. Just tell me, what does magic can mean and what does magic hoe mean? Okay, magic can, magician that exists, yes. And magic hoe, you're going to tell me non-existing magician, correct. So can anyone think of examples of either category? Like, rattle off a few names of some actual magic cans, and then on the other hand, some magic hoes. Let's just make sure we're all clear about what these examples would be. So we see the definition, good. For example, case of Cordy, David Blaine, Houdini, that would be the magic can. Okay, let's be clear because he didn't label it as such, but that's right. David Blaine and Houdini were real flesh and blood people, essentially, like human beings that did live on the face of the earth, that did magic as a job. And then Merlin would be a magic hoe, okay, because Merlin is like a fictional character from Knights of the Round Table, an old, you know, just fiction piece of literature. Merlin's not the only magic hoe, though. You guys are all aware of that, right? There's like, I don't know, Dumbledore, Harry Potter, Gandalf, and other literary and fictional characters that are doing magic in their fictional world. Okay, so magic can, real life magicians. Magic hoe, made up characters and stories and stuff that do magic. Now, what's his point? His point is that, okay, now suppose that tomorrow, for some reason, all the people who are currently existing magicians, just they die or something overnight tonight. So people come for these magicians tonight, they're done, they're out, they're gone. Tomorrow, there's no more. But couldn't we still have this word magic can tomorrow? We could still talk about it at our Wednesday midterm review session. And then we would be talking about a word that has the definition existing magician, but there wouldn't actually be any such people. Okay? So here's the point then. Just having the word mean, by definition, existing blank, cannot by itself serve as adequate proof that there is such a thing. If, for example, as in the case given here, there were no magicians, if contrary to fact, counterfactually, there were no magicians, the word would still remain, and it would still bear that definition, but there wouldn't actually be anything real that corresponds to it. So magic can is a word that he's defined in order to show how it is parallel to the word God. Because according to him, God also is a being defined to exist, defined as existing in the original by Anselm. But existing according to a definition is not by itself proof that the thing has to exist in reality. I offered you guys a different example that I thought eliminated one difficulty, which is that you don't have to, let's say, engage with the counterfactual of, like what I just said, pretend that magicians stop existing, or like imagine, contrary to fact, that they never existed before in the first place. That requires a bit of a counterfactual thinking. Like imagine that. That's not too hard, I don't think, but sometimes it throws people off. So take another version. Say I make up the words unican and unico, and I tell you that unican means existing unicorn, and unico means non-existing unicorn. Now, there are some non-existing unicorns, like in literature and fiction and memes, like Charlie the Unicorn, or from My Little Pony, or from the movie, what is it, JoJo or whatever. There's a unicorn in that. But there's no real unicorns. So the word unican, even though it means existing unicorn, there's no such thing. So whether it's unican, magican, or God, the author is saying that defining something as existing is not enough to show that there really has to be such a thing. I make up the word unican and I tell you it means existing unicorn, but despite this, they still don't exist, and they never have existed. So with the word God, maybe he says it could have the word existence as part of the definition, but that's not proof by itself, because if it were, then I guess I would have been able to just now prove that unicorns exist merely by inventing a word that defines them as existing. Okay, so magican, magico. It's an example to show that even if you define something as existing, like say the word magican, that it doesn't have to exist just on the basis of that word and that definition. So defining God as existing in a way parallel to unican or magican cannot suffice as proof. If there's no such thing as God, then the word God is similar to the word unican, defined as existing, but there's no such thing. Okay, so for that question, if that question were selected, you'd have to engage in the counterfactual, according to which, suppose there's no magicians that really exist, and we still made up the word magican. Then you'd be able to illustrate his point that making this word with this definition, it's compatible with that the thing doesn't exist. Okay. So let's go on. What's next for you? Still have a decent little amount of time for today's meeting. So let me know. I have a study guide, so I'm ready to take whichever topic that you want to jump onto next. Just take a moment, but then let me know what's on your mind for the next review question here. "28. Why does Kant say only goodwill is good in itself?" Okay, thanks. That's a good one. Why does he say that? Why? Well, he compares the goodwill with other qualities that are usually the subject matter of praise and esteem. But he compares these other qualities to the goodwill, and he tries to make the point that although these other qualities can and usually are good things, they're not always good. So maybe you can help me understand and explain why he thinks that, or why he has argued this. How could it be that other qualities that are generally positive are not always good? Well, yes, that's, but not exactly, Kylie. You say because the goodwill will always uphold the moral law. Yes, true. The goodwill will always seek to live according to the moral law from a sense of duty. But we have to get into this comparative where we talk about other qualities that are not unconditionally good. Because saying that goodwill is the only thing good in itself means that other things are not good in themselves, but only conditionally good. Like good sometimes and not always. So help me understand and remind the rest of the students, why is it that like intelligence or bravery are not always good? Or why is it that, dedication and hard working, perseverance are not always good in themselves? Because these are the things like that we would contrast with the goodwill, and that we would make a case they're not unconditionally good. They're not good in themselves. Why is it that happiness is not even good in itself? So tell me, why is intelligence, bravery, etc. not always good? Because they may not have good intentions, right? So can you give me an example of what you mean? Say that a person's intelligent. How could that be bad? If what? In what case is being intelligent, is that kind of intelligence that that person has dangerous, scary, and we just would prefer that person doesn't have so much intelligence? You kind of said it, Kylie. I was just hoping maybe we could expand on the point a little bit, right? Like, a person's so smart, right? So they're intelligent. When is that a bad thing? When they don't have a goodwill, when they're evil and wicked. So if a person is, a scheming, like evil mastermind, then do you want that person to have the best of all intelligence? Probably not, because then they're going to be able to more skillfully pursue whatever evil goals they have to the completion that they want. So intelligence in the wrong hands is just an enhancement to further harm and danger. So intelligence can be good when it's beheld by a virtuous and moral person that has a good will. But when intelligence is in the hands of someone evil, wicked, immoral, then it becomes something not good at all, and it becomes something that's bad. And that's the same pattern that he makes with all the other things. If you're brave, meaning you're willing to face danger to achieve a goal, if you have a good will, the bravery will serve the good, and it'll be a good thing. But if you're evil, then the bravery you have will serve evil, and it'll make you more dangerous than if you were a coward. So bravery in the wrong hands is dangerous and not a good thing. Wealth, power, he talks about that. Of course, if a person's got money, then that's the ability to do more things in life that they want to do because you have more options and more freedom, flexibility, all the things that wealth gives you. But if you're an evil person with wealth, then that kind of wealth is the wealth that we don't think is a good thing because it's not going to tend towards a morally good outcome. We're talking about morality, right? Not just self-interest. So whether it's good to be intelligent in a moral sense depends on whether it's going to lead to anything moral. Whether it's good to be brave in a moral sense depends on whether it's going to lead to anything moral, not just whether it's going to lead to your desired outcome. Because if you have evil desires, then your desired outcome is a bad outcome. It's not a good moral outcome. So anyway, a good will always just tries to do the right thing according to the moral law. Intelligence, happiness, hard work, bravery, everything else except for the good will can be turned towards an evil purpose if the person with it does not have a good will. So that's why Kant says, try and have a good will first and foremost. Because if you just try to become smart, strong, brave, or anything else, and it's not accompanied by a good will, then this doesn't mean that you're going to be a good moral person in the end. You might just be a brave, evil person, or a smart, evil person, or a very dedicated, hardworking, evil person. So it's about morality anyway. That's what he's writing about. You want to be moral, have a good will, which is when you try to act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law. Okay, and you'll see that in the very first page of Kant's writing, where he discusses it himself, as quoted Kant here. On page 106, there's no possibility of thinking of anything at all in the world or even outside of it which can be regarded as good without qualification except a good will. Intelligence, wit, judgment, whatever talents you might want to name are doubtless in many respects good and desirable, as are qualities of temperament such as courage, resolution, perseverance, but they can also become extremely bad and harmful if the will which makes use of these gifts is not good. The same holds with gifts of fortune, power, honor, riches, even health, wealth, and that complete well-being and contentment with one's condition, which is called happiness. A good will constitutes the indispensable condition of even being worthy of happiness. Okay, so just using some quotes to back up the discussion here. We might have time for one more quick topic before we break for today's meeting. If you guys have anything that's that you've been wanting to call out for a quick review, now would be the time to let me know. And maybe we can sneak it in before we run out of time today. So let's just see. I'll let you guys think for a second and look at this live chat and see if there's any other new questions. So number 3 positions are on the questions of God's existence. Yeah, that one is, I think, kind of a softball in a way. What do you think? What are 3 positions, 3 views that people have about the question of God's existence? Because not everyone's on the same page. We don't have 100% of everyone with the same position or view on that. So what are different views of God's existence? You got blank, blank, and blank. 3 views. What are those? Correct, Angel, yes. It's theism, atheism, and agnosticism. Kylie, is it a terminology question? Well, everything's terminology. Just talking is terminology. Just even speaking, writing, anything. So yes. Does exist, does not exist, cannot determine whether God does or does not exist. Yeah, so theist is a person that adheres to theism. The theist is the person who believes in the existence of God. So they affirm God does exist. That's a believer. A non-believer is an atheist. This is a person who denies or doubts the existence of God. An agnostic is a person who's not committed either way, towards belief or towards non-belief. It's the person who says, I take no view of it because I don't think the evidence is strong enough to have proof or disproof. So basically have believers, non-believers, and then uncommitted. Theists, atheists, and agnostics. And the agnostic remains uncommitted due to the perception of insufficient evidence to prove either way. The exam, no, the exam's not over Zoom. You just take the exam by yourself. with your computer. There's no way of monitoring you. So no, you won't have a camera pointed at you. But you will have to return your answers by 9:50. And let me just say this: when you write the answer, when you develop your resources for preparing for the midterm, you cannot create an answer bank that multiple students use. So that's one thing that's important. I mean, I just assume you know that, but just to make it very clear, you cannot collaborate on writing the answers. So you can't have shared answers of any kind. You can talk about the questions, you can talk about the material, but you cannot like literally have verbatim same common answers. If I see any students that use the same wording as either other students or something that's written on the internet, that'll be flagged and deducted. So you don't have to worry about that though, as long as you just prepare independently, meaning that you don't, have an answer bank, multiple students saying, okay, we can all agree this is the wording, right? So we're gonna go with this. No, it has to be individual and unique to you. So your wording and the way you explain it has to be something that no other student is doing, which is exactly what will happen unless people had shared answers. So just know that that's my only kind of security mechanism. Is the exam given on Canvas? Yeah, it's going to be delivered through Canvas as a document to you at at 10 a.m. Sorry, because we're 10 to 10:50. So it'll show up in your inbox as a Canvas notification, as an announcement, just like the one that I sent last night. But it's going to contain the file with the midterm exam about 5 minutes prior to class time, and then you'll have until the expiration of the class period to email me back your attached submission with your answers. That could be a typed document, or it could be a handwritten document if you want to send me a scanned image of it. But yeah, that's all. You just receive the test file just prior to 10, and then you have till 10:50 to send back your answers as an email attachment. Anything other questions about that? I definitely want to make sure everyone's all clear about how we're doing it. But yeah, you receive the test through Canvas, you'll submit it as an email back to me, and it's on Friday from 10 to 10:50. I'm going to hold office hours this week, Thursday, from 11:30 to 12:30. That's something I don't know if I mentioned earlier, but I'm going to do that so that anybody who wants to have an opportunity to have some last-minute cramming or just questions could see me, because normally my office hours are after our class meetings on Friday. So I want to make it before. Therefore, it's going to be Thursday, 11:30 to 12:30 in the afternoon. If that doesn't work for anybody, at least I'm trying to provide it, and you can always ask me questions too via email if you have any. Okay, guys, and like I said at the beginning, I have finished now grading the first essay, so as soon as you email me a request for your grade, I'll be working on getting you a reply within the next 48 hours at the most, since I have a lot of messages coming in and stuff. Just give me 2 days at the most to respond, but I'll try to be faster than that. Okay, so any other questions for me? Let me know if you do. If not, then just say you're all good. And from there, I'll close the stream for today, and we'll meet back up in a few. So just hanging in here for a minute. Okay, thanks, Claire. Thanks, Olga. Thanks, everybody. I got my first dose of this corona vaccine on Saturday, so that's a nice thing. It's always nice to know that we're kind of getting back to normal. I can report that there's, in my case, like 0 side effects except just a slight soreness at the injection site on the arm over the weekend. But all right, guys. Well, take care then, and I'll see you back on Wednesday. Let me know if you need anything, and please request your grades for your essays whenever you want. Okay, then. Have a good one, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.